Hello and welcome. Today, we're going under the microscope to dissect a really critical process, the pharmaceutical audit. This is the deep dive health check that makes sure the medicines we all rely on are safe, effective, and high quality.
So, let's start with this quote, because it's pretty much the golden rule for any auditor. This is the philosophy that drives everything. We're about to see just how vital this idea is in an industry where, let's be honest, there's absolutely no room for error.
Here's how we're going to break it down. We're going to follow the entire life of an audit, right from the very beginning. We'll look at why they're so important, who's on the team, how they plan their attack, how they collect the evidence, and finally, how they deliver that all-important final verdict.
All right, first up, why do audits even matter? So, what is an audit really? I think the best way to wrap your head around it is to think of it less like a test, with a pass or fail grade, and more like a proactive health checkup for the entire quality system.
And this brings us to a really important distinction, an inspection versus an audit. See, an inspection is reactive. It finds a problem that's already there, like, hey, this tablet is broken. But an audit, that's proactive. It looks at the whole system to ask a much bigger, much more important question. Is this system even capable of preventing broken tablets in the first place? It's about preventing the fire, not just putting it out.
So, what's the point of all this? Well, there are four main pillars. Number one, and this is the big one, is patient safety. That's always the top priority. But audits are also about keeping the company compliant and inspection ready for agencies like the FDA. They help prevent those hugely expensive product recalls that can absolutely tank a company's reputation. And they're a tool for continuous improvement, for making things better, faster, and safer. Okay, so who are the people behind this whole process? Well, a good audit is definitely not a one-person job. It really relies on this clear, three-party relationship where everyone knows their role. So you have three key players. First, there's the client. That's who's asking for the audit. Maybe it's a regulatory agency like the FDA. Then you have the auditee. That's the organization being looked at, like a pharmaceutical warehouse. And right in the middle, you have the auditor, the independent, objective expert who's there to conduct the examination without bias.
And each of these roles has some really specific duties. The lead auditor is basically the team captain. They plan the whole thing and write the final report. The auditor is the investigator on the ground, digging for that objective evidence. And the auditee is the host, right? They provide access to everything and everyone, and most importantly, they're the ones who have to commit to fixing whatever problems are found.
So, the team is all set. How does an audit actually get started? Well, believe it or not, a huge amount of the work and the success of an audit is decided long before anyone even shows up on site. It all comes down to the game plan.
It's really a four-step process. First, you have to define the scope and criteria. What exactly are we looking at, and what are the rules we're judging it by? Then, you do what's called the desk audit, reviewing documents from afar to sniff out potential risks. Then, you build a detailed plan, an agenda for the visit. And finally, you prepare a checklist to make sure nothing gets missed. And the plan itself usually follows a pretty logical path. It makes sense to just follow the flow of the materials themselves, right? You start where the raw materials come in, you follow them through warehousing and manufacturing, then to quality control, and finally to the last check before they get shipped out. It's like following a story from beginning to end.
Now, that checklist we mentioned, it's a really powerful tool, but only if you ask the right questions. A bad question is one like, is the balance calibrated? Because the answer is just yes or no. A good question demands proof. It says, show me the calibration log, show me the certificate, show me the test results. It's not about asking if they do it, it's about making them prove it.
And that brings us to the exciting part, the boots on the ground phase. Once the auditors are actually on site, they use a few different techniques to find the cold, hard facts.
You can think of it like a triangle of evidence. On one side, you have inquiry. That's asking people open-ended questions, like, show me how you do this. On another side, you have observation, just watching things happen, and keeping an eye out for what we call soft signals, like a fresh patch of paint that might be hiding a leak. And the third side is examination, verifying everything by looking at the documents and records. You really need all three to get the full picture. And speaking of those records, every single piece of data gets put through something called the Alcoa Plus test. It's an acronym that means the data has to be attributable to a specific person, it's got to be legible, it has to be recorded contemporaneously, meaning right when it happened, it needs to be the original record, and of course it has to be accurate. If even one of those is off, the data just isn't trustworthy.
Okay, so all the evidence has been gathered. Now comes the moment of truth.
The auditor has to classify what they've found. And this isn't about giving a simple grade. It's more like a triage system for risk. So at the top, you have a critical deficiency. This is a 5-alarm fire. It means there's a direct risk to patients, or maybe even fraud. An example? Finding pests in a sterile manufacturing area. That is an absolute showstopper and needs to be fixed immediately. Next down is a major deficiency. Now this points to a really serious breakdown in the system. It's not just a one-off mistake, it's a bigger failure. Like say, the company never actually finished validating their equipment cleaning process. This is a huge risk that could easily snowball into a critical problem. And finally, you have minor deficiencies. These are usually isolated issues that don't really affect the product quality directly. Think of a single cracked tile on the floor in a warehouse where the product is never exposed. Yeah, it needs to be fixed, but it's not an immediate threat.
But just finding the problems isn't enough. An audit is only really over when the risk has been totally eliminated. And that's where the CAPA plan comes in. That's corrective and preventative action. It's not just about patching the immediate problem. It's about digging deep to find the root cause and then putting a system in place to make sure it can never happen again. Then, the auditor follows up to make sure the fix actually worked.
And that really brings us back to the heart of it all. A good audit is never a witch hunt. It's not about pointing fingers at people. It's about finding the cracks in the system so they can be fixed, making everything stronger, and ultimately protecting all of us.
So that leaves us with a fascinating question. You need a rigorous plan, a detailed checklist to make sure you cover all your bases, but what's more valuable in the end? The plan itself or the sharp, observant eye of an auditor who can spot something that isn't on any checklist? It's that balance that really makes for a great audit.